Hello, I'm Jake Cook. I am in Matthew Nolan's class for intercultural communications, and the article that I chose was Shakespeare in the Bush by Laura Bohannan. And basically, the main idea is that the cultural worldview strongly shapes how people interpret stories, behavior, and meaning. Bohannan's attempt to tell Hamlet to the Tive people reveals that what she assumes to be a universal understood story was instead reinterpreted through Tive culture beliefs, social norms, and values. The article demonstrates that meaning is not fixed or universal, but culturally constructed. The worldview and the interpretation of the cultural meaning. Um, I think the article clearly illustrates how worldview influences interpretation. As Bohannan narrates Hamlet, the Tive elders continually interrupt to correct her understanding of events. For example, they interrupt Hamlet's father's ghost, not as a supernatural spirit of the dead, but as an omnim or witchcraft, because their worldview does not include the Western concept of ghosts. Similarly, they view the Gertrude's remarriage as socially appropriate and even necessary according to Tive customs. These differences show that people understand behavior, morality, and relationships based on their own cultural framework, rather than the storyteller's intent. Um, the ethnocentric basis, the ethnocentric bias, in the article. One ethnocentric bias in the article is Bohannan's initial attempt that Hamlet represents a universal truth about human nature. She believes the Tive will naturally understand Shakespeare's themes in the same way Western audiences do. This belief reflects on a Western-centered worldview that elevates European literature as universally meaningful. Her surprise at the Tive elders' interpretations reveals how her own cultural backgrounds shaped her expectations and limited her understanding on how the Tive makes sense of stories. The story challenges the notion that challenging the idea of normal or best. The story challenges the notion that one's own culture values are not normal or best by showing that every culture sees its values as logical and correct. The Tive elders confidently reinterpret Hamlet to align with their customs, just as Western readers do. By the end of the story, it becomes clear that Bohannan's interpretation is not inherently superior, it is just simply different. This realization undermines the idea that any single culture holds the correct worldview. The cultural norm versus my own culture. In American culture, direct eye contact is often seen as a sign of honesty, confidence, and respect. However, in some cultures, avoiding eye contact, especially with elders or authority figures, is considered respectful. An outsider from such a culture might view direct eye contact as aggressive or disrespectful, which is kind of crazy. This difference highlights how the same behavior can have opposite meanings depending on the cultural worldview. Best practice for cross-cultural communication. A key best practice is for cross-cultural communication is to avoid assuming shared meanings and instead ask the questions and listen carefully. In the article, Bohannan's experience shows that storytelling without understanding the audience's worldview leads to misinterpretation. A better approach would have been first to learn the Tive, explain family roles, spirits, and justice. This practice encourages cultural humility and reduces the misunderstandings in the culture. personal experience, and comparison. I have observed cultural misunderstanding when humor or sarcasm is used across cultures, because in some cultures, sarcasm can be confusing or perceived as rude rather than playful. This mirrors the misunderstanding in Shakespeare in the Bush, where Bohannan expects emotional reactions aligned with Western drama, but the Tav respond analytically and practically. Instead, in both cases, differing worldviews shaped how the messages were interpreted. And then to conclude, the most significant lesson, I think the most significant lesson from this article, Shakespeare in the Bush, is that perception is shaped by culture, not universal truth. The article emphasizes the importance of cultural awareness, humility, and open mindedness in intercultural communication. Understanding that our interpretations are not neutral but culturally influenced helps us communicate more respectful and effectively across any cultural boundaries. So yeah, that's all I got for summarizing that article and everything I had written down. Thank you so much for your time. Yeah, thank you so much for your time, Professor.